The title of my talk is Tino Sehgal's This Progress, as Constructed Conversation, as Philosophic Practice. A minor technique. In the spirit of the content I'm soon to present, I will be slowly walking a circle around the room while delivering this talk. And pieces of paper at the front of the room will display the title of the paragraph that I am speaking about. Socrates created a formal shift in the art of conversation that began the tradition of philosophy in the West. I'm calling this shift a constructed conversation. A conversation that was not completely spontaneous and yet not wholly scripted. For Socrates, a constructed conversation had key techniques. These techniques were set in place in effort to create a conversation that would lead an interlocutor towards greater knowledge via a dismantling of their semblances of knowing. Not only was the argument itself crucial for this dismantling, the techniques themselves were as well. So the conversation would begin as Socrates would poke at an interlocutor, giving ironic admonishment, thereby egging them on towards the initial requirements for Socratic dialogue. The conversation would proceed as Socrates would bombard the interlocutor with question after question in an attempt to show logical inconsistencies in their knowledge. Each question ensured the consent of the interlocutor, and in this respect ensured that the interlocutor would give in to the beliefs and claims of each stage of argument. Each question was typically short and would be rich with metaphor and example, techniques that helped to catch and hold the interlocutor's attention and ensure their continued focus by not allowing too much time to pass before they accepted or rejected a claim. These were some of the conversational techniques which made up the Socratic method and which opened up a new way of thinking and conversing. Although Socratic constructed conversation was a key catalyst in the initial formation of the academy, the modern academy fails to implement this method or provide alternative models of constructed conversation. Socratic dialogue is rarely used in a university setting. In the academy today, when verbal dialogue occurs, it occurs outside of any specific technique or method. The vast majority of diverse thinking techniques employed by the academy today are textual techniques, techniques of writing and reading. Conversation typically opens up as a minor organic gesture that accompanies these vast array of textual techniques. Of course, classroom conversation have some rules that generate their existence. However, these rules are rarely noticed and rarely played with. This is most evident by the lack of the specific meaning given to any verbal conversational structuring in an academic setting. Socratic dialogue was made by Socrates. Talk therapy was developed by Freud. The vast array of writing styles available for philosophy were developed by various thinkers, Descartes, Nietzsche, and Heidegger. There's a great dearth of specific dialogical techniques within higher education. The Situationists were a group of radical artists, intellectuals, and activists whose main activity occurred in Paris in the 1950s and 60s. Much like Socrates in the ancient Greek agora, who invented a technique for waking up the Greek citizen from their semblances of truth, the Situationists invented techniques for waking up the modern consumer to the insidious workings of capitalism. They coined the term constructed situation to describe these sets of techniques that would begin to accomplish such a feat. What is a constructed situation? Guy Debord in 1957 states, "Our central idea is the constructed situation, that is to say, the concrete construction of momentary ambiences of life and their transformation into a superior passional quality." Desire feeds activity, yet we desire minimally and feebly. In order to positively alter life, we do not need to satisfy any more desires, which is what capitalism already accomplishes. Rather, we need to create new desires. The creation of new desires will come out of attempts to construct situations. Ooh.
technical difficulties, yeah.
Ambiences of life. A given moment passes by quickly, much like that moment. It moves us from one set of impressions and ambiences and feelings to the next. We are usually swept along life without really paying too much attention to these. Moreover, due to habit and our being swept along, these moments can be mundane, boring, and similar in quality. However, we can construct a moment. If we set enough factors in place, we can consciously create the conditions for radical shifts in ambiences. The shift isn't created by us. It comes out of the environment which we create, whether conscious or not. The Situationists remind us that we need to stop focusing on constructing the content of our words. This will get us nowhere new because the content is related too much to the conditions that they rest upon, our habituated ways of life that have brought us the same ways of talking. In our intellectual conversations, we'll keep asking the same questions and keep getting the same answers because we keep conversing in the same way. What are these ways? They can be spatial, coffee shops, classrooms, city parks. They can be internal to the conversation, negating terms based on other philosophical frameworks, questioning terms until you come upon an axiom. They can be physical, walking, sitting, standing. While we are having our conversations, we are ignorant of the ambiances that pass by. We are ignorant of the environmental and structural conditions that we exist within. While we are talking, sharing our thoughts with a friend, our situations were lived moment by moment and then vanished. What is needed is for them to be constructed. This talk is about a constructed conversation. I've spoken much about what it is for a situation to be constructed, but what about conversation itself? What exactly is conversation? I will leave you with a simple contrast. A conversation can be distinguished by its counterpart, the lecture. A conversation involves a participatory back and forth. An even more challenging question to this talk is, what is a philosophical conversation? We are immediately tempted to say that a philosophical conversation is merely a conversation that talks about philosophical themes. This does some work, but there are two additional qualities pointed out by contemporary philosophers that I would like to elucidate. One is a quality emphasized by Gadamer. Gadamer explains that a philosophical conversation's movement is determined by a back and forth movement from question to answer. For Gadamer, a good conversation is one that holds open this movement for even longer, so it can go even deeper. The second quality is emphasized by Heidegger. Heidegger says, wood is an old name for forest. In the wood there are paths, mostly overgrown, that come to an abrupt stop where the wood is untrodden. These are called Holzwege. A philosophical conversation has dead ends. High marks for the one who knows how to traverse these dead ends and is not discouraged by them and learns from them. Tino Sehgal is a contemporary British-German artist whose work, some of which creates innovative platforms for intellectual conversation. Sehgal self-describes his work as a constructed situation. In this respect, Sehgal is combining and complementing work done by both the Situationists and Socrates. Sehgal tips his hat to Socrates as he creates constructed conversations which establish conditions for rigorous dialogical discourse. He gives a nod to the Situationists by throwing a wrench in the cogs of capitalism, by displacing the object-oriented commodification of goods, as his works are ephemeral and involve complicated verbal transactions for purchase. He acknowledges both as he uses the museum to create a modern polis. The museum becomes the place for critical dialogue that cuts through the homogenized and co-opted dialogue that takes place in other public spheres. Allow me to explain by providing an imaginational walkthrough of the piece This Progress. Sehgal does not allow any audio or video documentation of his work, so what I'm about to provide is a first-hand account, which I experienced in May 2010 of the piece This Progress. Guggenheim's main rotunda is composed of a wide, spiraling platform that winds its way up 6 levels. The inner core of the rotunda is left open, so that at any point a visitor can look down and up the center of the rotunda. The walls of the rotunda, usually adorned with art, were left bare for this progress. As you walked into the rotunda and started to go up the first level, a small child of perhaps age 7 to 9 would confront you, ask for your name, and tell you, "This is a piece by Tino Sehgal," and then ask you to follow him or her. If you proceed, the child then would ask you a simple question: "What is progress?" As you attempt to answer this difficult question, the child will start walking up the rotunda, requiring you to walk and continue talking. The child is not satisfied with a mere answer after you speak. She will ask for more examples. You continue walking and talking, and eventually you reach level 2 of the rotunda. Here the child introduces you to a teenager, around 18 years old. The child repeats back your thoughts on progress to the teenager, and then the teenager takes over the conversation. The conversation continues from where it left off, but with the teenager. The child is now gone. The teenager has very little scripted lines in comparison to the child. He or she engages in more of a back and forth, as your ideas of progress are met with an adolescent inquisitive enthusiasm. You walk and talk and continue to wind your way up to the rotunda until you reach the 4th level, when an adult juts into the conversation by blurting out some idea, sentence, or thought. Eventually, as you continue walking, the teenager is left behind, and you're left talking and walking with the adult. By the 5th level, you're presented with an older individual who tells you the name of the piece, this progress, and then proceeds to tell you a story about their life. This elder then continues to converse with you until you reach the top of the rotunda. Here, the piece is finished. The actor thanks you, and you are left at the top of the Guggenheim, looking down at the bottom of the rotunda. This progress begins with a question. What is progress? By beginning with a question that has no easy answer, this progress sets up the fertile ground for a philosophical conversation to ensue. As we converse, both child and teenager meet our answers with further questions, asking for clarification or challenging our claims. The adult and older individuals whom we converse with offer an expertise that can deepen the questioning process. Both of these factors nourish the back and forth questioning and allow it to go deeper. Typically, Sehgal does not employ actors in his pieces. In fact, he doesn't call them actors, he calls them interpreters. He usually finds theoreticians, philosophers, academics, and psychoanalysts who in their work or practice have some sort of affinity to the kind of art that Sehgal is creating. More than deepening questioning, the structure of the piece allows one to persist despite conversational dead ends. Should you get into a dead end of a conversation with one interpreter, you will soon be met by another interpreter who will offer you a radical shift in the conversation's path. Do all these factors ensure that this progress gives its participants a philosophical conversation? Clearly not. However, they do create a structure that nourishes philosophical dialogue. Whether or not a conversation manifests, philosophical conversation that is dependent upon the given particulars of the walkthrough of the piece. Sehgal's pieces are doubly active for participants. Dialogue is more active than lecture. In dialogue, one has to speak. Of course, listening can be active too, and one must be an active listener in both lecture or dialogue. But in a lecture, one has the opportunity to stop paying attention. One can be passive. If one stops paying attention in dialogue, then the conversation goes with you and where your attention goes. Lecture gives a greater opportunity for passivity than dialogue. This progress adds another layer onto this activity already active within dialogue. This was pointed out to me by an article written by Pape, Thane, and Naomi called Welcome to This Situation, Tino Sehgal's Impersonal Ethics. They mention here that as a participant in Sehgal's pieces, one must attend to the continuously changing immanent criteria of the situation. It's not only the content of the conversation that one must attend to, one must consistently attend to the ways the conversation is occurring and actively accept, reject, or alter these modalities. One must keep walking. But what happens if I walk slower? What happens if I pause? How will this affect the conversation? Pape Thane and Naomi mention techniques that Sehgal uses in another piece of his, This Situation. These techniques were welcoming, breathing, walking backwards, posing, reciting, moving slowly, inviting, complimenting, and rewinding. They state that these techniques are essential in turning the piece into an animated machine, somewhat alive and existing in a constant in-between, devolving on the one hand into randomness, and on the other hand into a rigid structure where nothing new can evolve. These techniques are the glue that hold together the situation. How exactly did these techniques function? This question can only be addressed by asking how a particular technique functions in a particular situation. I want to look at two techniques. For each, I will explain how the techniques deepen philosophical conversation. Both techniques and conversations hit the same theme: progress. And this mutual thematic ground enables each to feed the other. The first technique is the structuring of age. The second technique is walking a spiral. When we speak with someone, there are countless factors that affect how we speak with them. One of these factors is the age of the person we are speaking with. In this progress, age is broken into 4 categories: childhood, adolescence, adulthood, old age. Each of these ages condition conversation in different ways. In most circumstances, if we go up and speak with a child, we're creating the possibilities for a conversation that is radically different than if we were to go up to an adult and speak. In most circumstances, these factors condition our conversation. However, the conversation we have is not designed with these factors in mind. In this progress, they were, again a sign of its constructed quality. Sehgal creates a moving tableau between the ages of human life that is most effectively accomplished via the movement from each human to the next, their age ever increasing. However, Sehgal does more than this. Sehgal trains his interpreters to embody particular conversational qualities of each age of life. In this progress, childhood is presented as an age of curiosity and imitation. The child portrays curiosity by asking the very question central to this piece: what do you think progress is? The child portrays the quality of imitation through his semi-authentic direction-following voice that both delivers a highly scripted dialogue and that also imitates or recounts the participant's words to the teenager. Adolescence is conveyed as a time when newly realized freedom allows for both enthusiastic discovery and negation. The teenager portrays this freedom by their lack of scripted restrictions. The teenager has no specific dialogical instructions. The enthusiastic discovery and negation were represented by both teenagers' spirited dialectical approach to the conversation as he or she both affirms and questions. Adulthood is seen as a time of decisive choice and focus. The adult portrays this through their concentrated delivery of one idea or claim and their clear identification with this claim. Old age is presented as a time of closure, reflection, and looking back. The senior in the piece portrays closure by delivering the title of the piece itself. He or she displays a reflective looking back by the telling of an important life story. At every age, Sehgal structures conversation techniques that simultaneously manifest that age and deepen dialogue. The actors and participants move through the space together. They walk up the spiral of the Guggenheim while engaging in conversation. This slow, upward, spiraling movement is another important conversational structuring provided by Sehgal. What is unique about walking a spiral? At all moments, one can see various perspectives of that which the spiral contains. And if the spiral is empty, like the vacuous space in the middle of the Guggenheim Rotunda, then those walking have a view of both what is behind them and what is to come. They're able to see participants who are further along the piece and participants who are behind them. They catch a glimpse of both future and past, while slowly marching onwards towards the former, the future that is. The conversation about progress is stimulated by this progressive moving image. At each moment in the conversation, we are afforded a new visual perspective of our immediate pasts and our immediate futures. These visual cues can help a conversation stay focused, as they too present us with progress, a progress that keeps shifting and that cannot be contained, as its perspective is always born anew. Walking in circles is a religious practice known as circumambulation. Paul Larson, in the Encyclopedia of Psychology and Religion, describes circumambulation as the act of marking off a space through physically walking its circumference, which allows humans to create a boundary between the sacred and the profane, or mundane aspects of their world. By circumambulating the Guggenheim Rotunda, we are taking part in this marking off of space. Perhaps not entirely a movement into the sacred, but still stepping outside of the common or ordinary. Outside this museum, public conversation in a civic setting is mainly reserved for financial transactions or quick exchanges. By walking this circle, we are marking this space as one reserved for deep philosophical conversation, an activity far from ordinary in the public sphere. The walking of circles is equally political, religious, and philosophical. The space is changed. The departure from the profane is marked by the radical questioning that exists on the margins of capitalism. This departure is enabled by Sehgal's constructive conversation. What can we take home from this? I believe that Sehgal is calling thinkers to not only create thoughts, but also to create structures for thoughts to occur. These structures are porous. They have techniques, but they also have much that is unknown. Dialogue is already an art with many unknowns. In that it is a live modality of improvising language. I believe many of us here are accustomed to the elation that comes with a lively intellectual conversation. This elation is one kind of pleasure. What other pleasures can come from intellectual conversation? What shifts in the conversation itself would occur as our desires shift, as we create constructed situations that shift these desires? Sehgal asks us to look beyond conversational content. For Sehgal, philosophical dialogue, environment, and technique work together in a sort of ecology. This plays out in this progress as the conversation on progress, the Guggenheim staircase, and the structuring of age and walking in spirals all determine one another. I believe that Sehgal's work provokes us to not only ask specific questions, but to also explore environments and techniques specific to our questions to see how each can inform the other. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Any questions from our two panelists?
That's right, we're experts. I'm an expert on affect.